Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Managing Director of Elcott Global. Our mission is to connect the supply chain ecosystem by bringing forward the most interesting leaders in the industry. I'm very happy to have with us today Sami Naffakh, who is the EVP and Chief Operations Officer at Arla Foods. Arla is the farmer-owned dairy cooperative with around 11,200 farmers in 7 countries, and which has to deal with 14 billion liters of milk produced by its farmers annually, and basically is the 4th largest dairy company in the world with respect to milk volume. Sami joined Arla Foods in January 2018, and he's leading a team of 13,000 colleagues based across more than 70 dairies, 120 distribution centers, and operations in 5 continents. His responsibilities include Arla's manufacturing and logistics operations worldwide, the global procurement of goods and services, as well as the support functions like quality and food safety, health, and sustainability. He has been working for the last 25 years in FMCG and has had leadership roles within businesses such as Unilever, Reckitt Beckinsale, Danone, and Estée Lauder prior to joining Arla. Sami, thanks a lot for making the time, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks a lot, Radu. Thanks for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very happy to have that discussion with you.
Maybe let's start firstly with a little bit about yourself, because you've had a very interesting career in supply chain. You have a versatile background. You've successfully transitioned across several FMCG brands, several geographies. You've worked on multiple continents. Maybe just tell us a little bit very shortly. I know it's 25 years, but tell us a little bit very shortly about that.
Well, look, I'm from a personal standpoint, I have multicultural background, and I've been moving quite a lot with my parents when I was a child. So I guess that created some attraction for moving and discovering new stuff. Having said that, I actually started pretty slow. I actually was in the same location for the first 7 years of my career, but then it got accelerated. I would say geographical mobility and functional mobility was always a wish. That is something I really wanted to do by curiosity and also as a way to discover new things and learn new things. The corporate mobility and the changes from various companies was more a question of opportunities. But in all cases, that's really proved to be great in terms of learning, but also in terms of driving agility and adaptability. I guess it's like everything. The more you practice and the more you learn from past mistakes, and I've made some mistakes when moving, the better you get at it.
That's for sure. And in terms of you as the COO of Arla, I wanted to touch upon some mind-blowing numbers. I mean, Arla is the 4th largest milk producer or processor in the world. You deal with something I was reading around 40 million liters of milk per day. Tell us a little bit about the scale of complexity of that supply chain.
Yes, and you've said a lot already in your introduction, Radu. But you're right. It's about 14 billion liters of milk on a yearly basis, and that's about 38 million per day. And as you said, Arla is a cooperative, which means that we don't control the demand on one side, but we don't control the supply on the other side neither. The way the cooperative works is that we are obliged to take every drop of milk which is produced by every farmer on a daily basis, and we have to make the best of that milk, the best use, and create the most value out of that milk for the farmers, which we then given back through the price of milk that we pay. So it is a pretty large scale and complex organization. As you were saying, in my scope, I have procurements on both direct and indirect. That, having said that, excludes milk due to the nature of the co-op. So, and like other FMCGs, our game is not to pay the lowest price for the milk, but to pay the highest price for the milk. So it's a dedicated organization. It's a large-scale manufacturing organization. As you said in your introduction, there's about 75 plants. 60 of them are in Europe, mostly in Northern Europe. The rest is in our international markets. It's a large logistics and transportation organization. We have about 120 distribution centers. We also have a huge fleet of trucks. We collect the milk. We transport goods between our factories and our distribution centers, and we also transfer from the distribution centers to the customers. So it's a lot of kilometers that we're driving on an annual basis. And then, of course, there's all the support services, which comes together with operations, planning, safety, quality and food safety, engineering, etc., etc.
I'd like to ask you just to drill a little bit deeper, because you're set up on specifically the point of you looking to pay the most that you can, because ultimately you work for your farmers, actually, and the fact that you also you have to manage the complexity and uncertainty of not controlling the demand. What are some of the challenges? Of course, there's some obvious ones that come with that, and how do you even navigate it?
Well, you're putting the finger on what is exactly the key challenge of that business, which is, and you have to look at this in three horizons. The first one is the purely operational horizon, which is on almost real time, at least on a daily basis. You have to look at the flows of milk which is coming through, and decide, how you're going to use your available assets and capacity to make the most value out of that milk. And of course, there is some forecasting on both the demand and the supply, but this is not a precise exercise. So there's always some volatility and some differences between the actual demand and the actual flow of milk you get versus what you had forecasted, which you have to be able to react very quickly. And where it gets very difficult is that, of course, you can do this by having a huge amount of available capacity, but that is very costly, and dairy is not a high margin business. So you want to reduce that available capacity to minimum so that it doesn't cost you too much, but you want to have enough to be able to manage that daily volatility that you have. So that's a pretty complex exercise. And then on the tactical and strategic horizon, it's all about making some bets about where do you see the demand evolving, where do you see the consumers moving to, where do you see the markets, especially on the commodity side of things, moving to, and therefore investing in the right capacity, in the right assets at the right time, bearing in mind that it takes, if we take the investments we're going to make on Mozzarella, which I know you're going to come back to, it takes 18 to 24 months between the time you decide to go for something and the time you get that capacity available. So, you have to be pretty forward-looking. And again, you can't afford to get it wrong, because if you get it wrong, this becomes very quickly extremely costly.
Spilled milk, literally, it becomes spilled milk. So I know you mentioned that, and I was sharing before we went online, that I'm going to ask you. You mentioned that in the article that you published on LinkedIn, the cost of spilled milk and the cost of wasting. And I know that you have a very interesting case study, and I wanted maybe you can share it with our listeners as well. I think you already have some very tangible results in terms of the savings that you've managed to pull out of driving ops excellence and efficiencies in your supply chain. So maybe we can touch upon that now.
Yeah, if you want. So as I said, this is a pretty low margin business, and we play on a number of segments. We do have a branded business, which by essence is more profitable, but we also have a lot of private label business and also some commodity businesses, and those are pretty thin on the margin. So we can't afford to have a lot of inefficiencies in effectiveness, and as a result, we are pretty relentless in trying to identify and eradicate all sources of waste that we can have. And that's, material waste, milk waste, but also product waste, energy waste, efficiency waste. You can name it as much as you want. And the approach we're taking is always the same. And that's what I'm going through in that article in LinkedIn. And the first step is really to understand at the right granularity, where do we waste and why do we waste? And that's easy said, but that's not easy done, especially when you have a large scale and pretty complex operation with a lot of plants, and within each plant a lot of processes and technologies. And the way we've been doing this is really through leveraging digital capabilities, big data, and analytics. So, we had to create an architecture of IoT where we could get the information almost real time on all the points where we believe we were wasting, where we're creating waste. And then we had to create the IT infrastructure to be able to collect that data, structure it, uniformize it, and then analyze it to drive action. So that's been a pretty intensive work we've been going through over the last 18 to 24 months, which is really paying off as we're speaking. The second pillar that we've been actively working on is really effective collaboration between the various entities in the business, so that we have a better both forecasting but also responsiveness. So how do we work better between our commercial friends who are planning the demand and dealing with the customers on the markets, and our milk friends who are dealing with the flow of milk and forecasting and managing what's happening on the farmer side, so that we try to be as proactive and as responsive as possible in managing the unforeseen and the volatility on both demand and supply. And the last thing which you alluded to is really to work on empowerment and train and give new tools to the people on the shop floor, but also to give them the power to take the right decisions at the shortest time interval possible. So a lot of work really in training, driving the capabilities and empowering people on the shop floor to drive action real time.
I want to probe a little bit on this last point, because it's ultimately is the crux of it's the crux of all changes. It's the people and it's the mindset that is usually the hardest to change. Is not the technology. Technology is available, but people need to use it and need to use it well. How can you give us some examples of how did you manage to do that in Arla? How would you drive it? Do you have certain, I don't know, you encourage people to fail, you do weekly reviews. I don't know. Is there something practical, tangible that you could share with our listeners of how you inculcate that culture of ownership and basically responsibility?
Yeah, so I would articulate this around three main areas, and that's something that we call the line-centric organization, the LCO. In Arla Foods, and something we've been working on together with the Boston Consulting Group. And the three main components of it is first to put the line or the shop floor back at the center of the attention. And that is related to servant leadership. So we had to change a bit the mindset in our operations, where the people in the lines or in the warehouse shop floor are not there to serve others to achieve their objective. It's the other way around. So the shop floor is the center of the attention, and everything which is gravitating around it is there to serve them. And that should be the obsession. And that seems obvious, but at least in the case of Arla, this was quite a paradigm change. Where, guys, what you do on your processes and your admin stuff and your fancy stuff that you like working on, etc., forget about it, as long as it doesn't help and support the people who are driving the day-to-day, hour by hour operation on the shop floor in both factories and logistics operation. So that's the first point, and that's more a kind of mindset and leadership change. The second thing was to recreate, as I said, a line-centric organization where we created cells using, putting together operators, but also maintenance technicians, which we pulled out of their offices and put directly on the line to work in a team with the operators, people working on continuous improvements, people working on the quality, and this little group owns an asset. So they can own a line or a couple of lines or an area in a warehouse, and they're responsible, accountable, and empowered to drive the performance on the area that they're responsible for. So you really give the power back to the shop floor, and you empower them, and of course you train them, and you give them new tools to be able to succeed in that quest. And the last thing I would say is that we've reduced the time interval, where we're saying everything that can be resolved by this team that I've just mentioned in their shift has to be resolved there without any kind of escalation, reporting, whatever to anybody else. So what you can fix and what you can sort in your time interval, you do so, and you're fully empowered and trained to do so. And only what goes beyond the time interval of a shift has to be escalated. And then we do the same on the daily base, and then we do the same on the weekly base, etc. So we move from everything has to be reported out to management, and then that goes into the Pareto, and then you only scratch the surface of the top problems, but you don't fix the immense majority of the problems, to you fix everything in different time intervals. And again, that seems to be pretty easy to understand conceptually. In ways of working, it's quite a radical change, but that is very, very powerful.
Thanks for sharing. I mean, I could not agree more. And I mean, it's not, especially the point with giving the empowerment to the people of solving things by themselves. Fundamentally, it sounds like a very obvious thing to do, but in actual fact, when those people were used to let's say, wait for the decisions to be made at management level, and maybe the management, like you said, the other mindset changes to empower the shop floor and put it at the center, versus the management using them as kind of a tool. It's big shifts, and I would say that most companies, or a lot of companies, a lot of manufacturing companies, don't have yet to make that shift. In some ways, it's kind of like companies forgetting to put the consumer at the center of what they do, and getting too lost at the level of internal politics, which also happens a lot. And I'm sure your friends at BCG that you use can attest to that. That's why they have a lot of business, because we tend to forget the fundamentals. So I'm very happy that you shared this very practical example, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't easy for you, but happy that it worked out. And I want to now go to that point which you brought up briefly on the Mozzarella plant. I think it's in Brandenburg. It's a big investment for you. It's close to $90 million US dollars that you made there. And I wanted to go a little bit deeper. What's the long-term strategy? Why is this important to Arla as a company? And how do you think it at the bigger picture?
Yes, and look, this is a perfect example of what I was referring to before, where we have to make some strategic decisions on where do we believe, what do we bet on, and where do we believe value for the milk is going to be created in the future. So in the case of mozzarella, actually, it was pretty simple. If you look at the mozzarella markets, the global demand is booming, and that's primarily driven by the pizza market. Pizza is using 95% of the mozzarella which is produced worldwide, and that's pizza market is booming, especially in emerging markets. But even if you look at Europe, it's expected to grow double digits in the next 3 years. So there is a huge demand growth on mozzarella worldwide, and at the same time, and even though we have competitors who have announced also investments in mozzarella recently, Glanbia in Ireland and Fonterra and a couple of areas to name just a few, we know that even with these investments, the global capacity is not going to be sufficient to support the expected growth. So from a demand versus capacity standpoint, the picture is or seems to be pretty clear. And on top, mozzarella is really an area. Well, cheese in general, and mozzarella in particular, is an area where we do believe we have real expertise and some pretty unique products. So, some strong R&D and production know-how, some pretty unique products that we can offer to the customers and which we know are highly appreciated. So when you put the two together, and considering that our current assets on mozzarella have been completely overutilized already, it was a pretty straightforward decision.
I didn't know this. I never thought about this. So definitely, there's more people eating pizza. That's a good thing. I also like pizza, but definitely good for you. I know also that you have some pretty big relocation projects that are being done at the moment. So you have a couple of changes of cream production lines. You also are shifting from your site in Saudi Arabia. I think you have a site in Riyadh to a new site that you acquired, which is located in Bahrain. these are not easy to do, especially, I mean, in any context, but okay, especially also in the context of the product that you have, which is, of course, you need to take into account safety and regulation and health and a lot of other criteria. So usually when you do such massive relocations, what are some of the biggest challenges that you need to take into account and to make it successful?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So before I answer the question, just to give maybe a bit of background to the audience, the reason why we're doing those transfers is because we've acquired recently a new factory in Bahrain, which we bought from Mondelez. And that factory already has some volumes which are under the Kraft license that we also keep. But the Middle East is a very big market for us, and currently, until we had purchased that new operation, we were shipping about 80% of the product out of Denmark, out of two factories in Denmark, one located in Kefa and the other one is located in Bislu. And a bit, the rest was coming from the plant in Saudi that you mentioned in Dania. So, having a new state-of-the-art operation located locally was a no-brainer in terms of proximity, agility, reactivity, responsiveness, etc. So that's why we decided to do the pretty obvious, which was to relocate the volumes that we currently produce in Denmark to that new plant in Bahrain. Having said that, as you're saying, this is the principle is pretty straightforward. Doing it correctly is not that straightforward. So to your question, when I thought about it, there are four main points that came to my mind. The first one is obviously to keep the product organoleptic consistency, right? You're dealing with foods. You know that people are very much attached to a given taste and consistency and experience. And of course, when you move from one factory to another factory, and when you start changing a bit the process, even though it might be similar, it's never exactly the same. And then you're going to use different materials because you're going to source materials locally instead of sourcing them in Europe. All of that can create some change in the customer experience and in the consumer experience. And that we have to minimize, because clearly you want to have a product which is as close as possible to what people are used to and to what they like. So that's the first challenge. Of course, the second one is during that transition, you want to keep customer service at the highest level and you don't want to have any disruption. So how do you make sure in the whole transition process that this is as smooth as possible, keeping in mind that you can't have it too long or too secure, otherwise it costs you too much. So where do you put the trigger between making it efficient and effective without taking risk on customer service would be a second challenge. The third one is, of course, that plant in Manama that we've acquired is going to be a huge change for them. We're going to be doubling, well, actually more than doubling to begin with, but that plant currently produces about 25,000 tons and is going to get to 100,000 tons in the next 4 years, let's say. So we're going to quadruple production in the next few years. That's a massive change. But that plant is producing. It's not like a green field. So we have to implement those changes and install all these new equipments and recruit all the new labor, et cetera, without disrupting the current operation, which is, again, a significant challenge. And last but not least, obviously, this comes with some implications for the sites in Denmark, who will see a significant amount of volumes moving out. So we have to very carefully and sensitively manage the consequences on that side of the pond.
Yeah, that's massive. So 4 times more. That is indeed mind-blowing numbers, from 25,000 tons to 100,000 tons. And that gets me to the next question, because I'm actually curious, and I think I'm speaking for a lot of other people in the audience. You have an incredibly strong presence in the Middle East, MENA region, right? Middle East and Africa region. So that's your largest market outside of Europe. how did that come about? And it's almost like, it's prompting into my mind. I'll ask you directly. Why do you have such a strong share of the market there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and the main reason is history, to be honest. But you're right. Middle East and North Africa is our largest international market. It's about 700 million euros of turnover these days, and it's still growing very fast. And that is very critical to the business because it's a fast-growing business, but it's also a fairly profitable business. The reason being that most of the product we sell in the Middle East are branded. And obviously, the margins on branded products are better than on private label or commodities. Now, back to your question, we actually, Arla started its presence in the Middle East a long, long time ago. It started, believe it or not, in the 1950s with the import of Naffakh, the butter brand. Why did somebody started importing Naffakh in the Middle East, in Saudi in the 50s? I don't exactly know, but there is a long track record of history. And then Danya Foods, our subsidiary in Saudi, was actually established in '77, so almost 50 years ago. And that strong history of presence means that we have a strong knowledge of the markets, strong knowledge of the players, strong stand in the business community, and that clearly helps a lot. Those markets are very specific. You need to understand how they work. You need to understand the consumers. You need to understand the customers. You need to understand how business is conducted. And I think we have all of that. And that translates in having a very strong product portfolio, both in terms of relevance and quality, which is driving, the growth we're still experiencing.
I want to come back a little bit, Sami, to the 2 points that you mentioned that mattered a lot in terms of the results you've gotten so far, which was point number one was increasing the visibility and the quality of insights that you got from the data around your supply chain and production and manufacturing, and the point number two, which was a better alignment between supply and demand, right? So I wanted to link those 2 points also and ask you, did you use certain tech innovations in particular that helped you get to those 2 points better? Was there, you mentioned IoT, were there some specific tech in supply chain innovations that you used that you could mention?
So I would mention quite a few. We did, and we're still, because that's obviously a never-ending program, but we did invest quite heavily in IoT and in process controls, from which we could gather data. We did invest a lot in creating a data hub, where we could collect and not only collect but also harmonize data, and then we did invest in a number of analytical tools whereby we could use this data and convert it into something we could use to drive action. So quite some work there. A lot of investment also in automation, and stuff like machinery and robotics is nothing new. But we also did invest a lot in AGVs, in automated guided vehicles. So if you walk in one of our factories these days, you'd hardly see, especially in the main ones, you'd hardly see any material movements or pallet movements through people or through manual forklift trucks. You see a lot of AGVs running across the whole factories, driving and bringing materials to the lines and taking the finished goods out of the lines and putting them into racks and taking them in the racks and driving them to the loading bay. So quite a lot of investment in automatizing the flow of goods. We're also, and this is more exploratory, but we're doing quite a lot of work into looking at automation in logistics. And I would look at it in two ways. One is we've invested in systems for having a continuous optimization of routing to minimize the number of kilometers that we run. We also have invested in some systems to optimize the fill rates of the trucks. and we're looking at, as anybody else, right? So we're looking at automatized trucks and self-driving trucks. Not something we're yet piloting, but something we're working on with a number of truck suppliers. The one thing that we're piloting in cities, especially in Copenhagen, is electrical trucks instead of fossil fuel-driven trucks. So a pretty wide range of investment in new techs and new tools.
Mm. And that brings me to the question around e-commerce, because it's changing. Basically, consumer behavior is changing, demand behavior is changing, pretty much everything actually, and it just continues to grow. And we've had Black Friday, we've had the Alibaba Singles Day, and it's again blown all records this year. How is that changing your business if in any way? How is the e-commerce channel affecting Arla?
To be honest, to date, not hugely, and this is for two reasons. The first one is that Arla is not having any business to consumer, direct to consumer business, right? It's we do e-com, but we do e-com through retailers, through the retail.com websites. And the second reason is that in the food industry, e-com is still pretty marginal. I think if I'm not wrong, it's about 3% of our turnover through e-com, through retailers. UK being the biggest market, where it's close to 10%, but it's still a pretty small portion. Having said that, you're right. E-com comes with, even when it goes through retailers, it comes with a number of challenges in terms of volatility and complexity. And if you bear in mind that a lot of our products are fresh and have a very short shelf life, this is something which we can only deal with through a better responsiveness. We can't, simply because of short shelf life, we can't build up huge inventories to cover for any unexpected demand from e-com. So it's all about being more agile and more responsive.
Mm. Moving the discussion a little bit to the human side and to the talent side, and basically to selecting people and picking the winning teams. Are there certain principles that you follow when you're choosing and selecting and retaining, or trying to retain your top talent in your leadership teams?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So if I'm looking at the way or what I'm looking for when I'm recruiting a new leader, or the way I assess people that I have in my organization, the first thing I would look at is the mindset. Has the person got the right mindset in terms of can do and will do, in terms of driving solutions rather than just raising problems, in terms of looking at new ways and new opportunities rather than just looking at what's been done in the past and the way we've been working in the past, and somebody who's a self-starter. So, mindset to me is very important, because this is what's going to drive the rest. The rest of the work. The second thing I'm looking at is the ability to embrace and drive change, and this is about being able to engage the organization, to work effectively with the people, to set the direction, and to get the organization behind the direction, driving the sense of purpose, driving the sense of priority, etc. So is that person able to drive change, but not as a person, but across his organization with his people? Because it's not very effective to have a leader running in front and then no one behind him.
That's not a leader. Yeah, that's taking a walk. Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't need experts. We have a lot of expertise in the organization from a technical standpoint, and also from a conceptual standpoint. We really need, what we need is people who can get the organization with them in the right direction. And as related to this, we do need people who are people focused, and people focused. This is always a bit tricky, because if you have to drive changes and if you have to drive improvements, it always comes with a bit of tension. So I'm not looking for people who want to be friends with everyone. but I'm looking for people who can have the right balance between pushing and pulling, who are obsessed with continuously developing their organization, their people, and who are effective in communicating and engaging. Communication is more and more a critical capability that we need to have in leaders. If you don't communicate properly, you don't create the sense of engagement, purpose, and urgency that you need, and therefore you don't get people behind you, and therefore you get stuck pretty quickly. So that ability to listen and to communicate both ways, which is, one way is to give your message, but the other way is to listen to what the people have to say and to take into consideration is quite critical. And the last one I would mention is that I'm always looking for people who have a good balance between a strategic mindset, so who can see not just today and tomorrow, but also the day beyond tomorrow, and who can drive the direction for the next few years, whilst having a pretty high operational acumen, because at the end of the day, we have to execute flawlessly, and we have to deliver the day-to-day performance.
And a very personal question to you, because you've managed successfully to transition. So you were 10 years in Unilever, then you went to Reckitt Beckensor for 5 years, then you were in Danone 5 years, then you were in Estée Lauder, which is, Danone is quite a different business than Reckitt Beckensor. Well, it is FMCG, but it's not quite the same. Then Estée Lauder obviously is more cosmetics. Now Arla, obviously a little bit different. How did you, are there certain principles when you made these changes? Because it's never easy to transition, and you've done it successfully. Are there certain principles that you follow to help you navigate to a new company, to form a new team, and to adapt and make it successfully?
Yes, I think there are some differences and there's some commonalities. So, it's a very wide question, and we could spend a lot of time on it. But if I'm trying to summarize it, it's a question of, I think, building on your past experiences, successes, but also failures. And I've not always been successful. I've made some mistakes, and I had some failures, and you have to learn from them. So using your past experience and looking at what is common and what you can leverage in a new business, in a new context, together with the ability to learn and to adapt to the new circumstances. So when you get in a new industry or in a new business, you have to understand how this works in terms of the way the business is run, how it works in terms of the way the industry is being, the playing field, but also the internal culture. So, what make people tick, what's the history, what happened in the past, what's the local culture, etc., etc. And very clearly, when you move from an American listed company, which is still run pretty much as a family business, i.e. Estée Lauder, to a Scandinavian dairy cooperative, you're in a completely different play field. And you have to take the time to understand this, and to understand, again, what you can leverage, and what are the past stuff that you can play with, and what is the new stuff that you have to adapt to and to learn.
For sure. Final question from me, Sami. Looking back on your career, which has been a long and very successful one, and if you were to share a couple of pieces of advice that you found most useful to you, maybe from your mentors or along the way, principles that you followed, what would that be?
I would say, the first one that comes to my mind is keep learning. It's always, things change. First, you might move from in different environments, as we just said, and you have to be able to learn and to adapt. And the world is changing, super fast. So the way, irrespectively of the industry, the way we run supply chain today is very different from what it was 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. And with the ongoing digital revolution, is going to change again very fast. So I'm pretty sure that the way we're going to be operating in 3 to 5 years is going to be very different from the way we operate today. And if you want to be staying in the game, and if you don't want to be getting into lagging, then you have to constantly learn and adapt to this new reality. And you have to have the willingness and the mental agility to be doing so. So that would be my first piece of advice. Be curious would be the second one, and that's also related to learning, right? Be curious about what's happening, not only in your business, not only in your company, not only in your industry, but beyond this. Because there might be a lot of good stuff which can be applicable to what you're doing. So look outside, connect, network, read, be open to the world, and be curious. And the last one is, and that's pretty much what I try to do in my career, is try to broaden your experience, and the sooner you do it, the better. So try to broaden your experience functionally, discovering new fields and new areas. Broaden it geographically, because it's a fantastic experience, and it's a fantastic learning to go abroad and be confronted with different ways of working in different culture. And I would also advise to go from to go in different companies, because you experience different operating models and different corporate culture, which also build your overall skill set and adaptability.
Thanks for sharing all of very valuable and valid points, Sami. Much appreciate all the examples and case studies and very good sharing session that we had today. Good luck in the next projects. Good luck with the relocation projects as well. Good luck with the mozzarella plant, and looking forward to buying some more of the Arla product to use it on my own pizza. And it's been a pleasure to have you with us today, Sami.
Yeah, thank you very much for your interview, Radu. It's been a very enjoyable time from my perspective.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.